Purple asters bloom in the autumn. You will often find them in the meadows and fields growing naturally. When other flowers are dying, the purple aster is blooming. Throughout history, the color purple was often associated with royalty, but in florography, the purple aster came to symbolize not royalty, but loyalty. A commitment to stay with someone through the good times and the bad. Loyalty is an essential quality of all relationships. We all need friends who are not only there in springtime, but are blooming their brightest in the autumn of our lives as well. The Bible uses the word brotherly love, or philadelphos, to describe this kind of loyalty. Moses had Aaron and Joshua to support him. Mary had Elizabeth. Paul had Barnabas and Silas. Even Jesus had 3 close friends. But when the purple aster was given, it symbolized not what your friends would do for you, but what you would do for them. You would be the loyal friend. Welcome to the Meadow. We've chosen this place for this particular word because the purple aster, the flower, grows wild in the meadow, and it's the flower that communicates the idea of loyalty. Now that's your third word in the 5 words that you need to remember in your friendships. And that's an important word, and so I'm going to take the entire time to talk just about that word. In fact, loyalty means to value others through commitment, confirmation, and when necessary, confrontation. 3 words that help us unpack the idea of loyalty: commitment, confirmation, and when necessary, confrontation. Now, the best person to talk about this with is King David in the Old Testament, because he interacts with 3 different individuals, and those 3 different individuals provide for him a circle of what I would call protection. 1 on the idea of commitment, 1 on the idea of confirmation, and 1 on the idea of confrontation. Let's talk about commitment first, and I'll be reading from 1 Samuel chapter 18, verses 1 and 3. There we read, "As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul," that is, King David, "the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul." Verse 3, "Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul." Jonathan and David in this passage have what we call a covenant relationship. In fact, the word is used in the text to describe the relationship just that way. It describes a promise that was to be kept at all cost. This is what I would call the friendship of commitment. It speaks of a friend who is loyal. They place your best interest ahead of their own. It's an important way to think about it because typically most friendships are about us getting what we want out of them, not about us placing someone's best interest ahead of our own. That's exactly what Jesus did, you may remember, in Philippians chapter 2. "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves." This covenant relationship will look like that. By the way, David and Jonathan had that together. Jonathan had a covenant relationship with David, placing his interest ahead of his own. Jonathan would have been the next in line to be king, but instead he referred to David being the one who would be king. It's important to remember that David honored that same covenant relationship too, when years later after Jonathan's death, he looked for Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, and honored him at his table. Your first circle is the circle of commitment. It speaks of the friend who is loyal. Your second circle is the circle of confirmation, and we place Samuel, the prophet, in that circle for David. It speaks of the friend who is attentive to your insecurities. They offer hope and encouragement. One of the things that Samuel did was he sought to confirm David's character over his appearance. The Bible says that David was a handsome man, but Samuel, you may remember, when the Lord spoke to him, said, "Do not look on the outward appearance, for I look on the heart." And that's why the Lord chose King David as king. Samuel acknowledges that and references that. Finally, when someone is confirming you, they seek to confirm others over themselves. Think about this for a moment. Hardly any character in the Old Testament was as popular as Samuel. He was a prophet, he was a priest, he was a judge, he was a counselor, but he was never a king. He left that responsibility for King David. That's how confirmation works, placing the other person ahead of yourself. Chip Ingram says that there's 7 key elements of a biblical friendship. Here they are, briefly. He says, first of all, number 1, be aware. know what's going on in a person's life. I have a friend like that who used to, when he would ask me how my day was, and I'd say, oh, it's okay. If he looked at me carefully, he would say, really, Phil? Really? As if to say, I see something in you because I'm aware of how you normally respond, and I'm asking a deeper question than just taking everything's fine as an answer. Number one, be aware. Number two, be intentional. Make every effort to embrace and engage in that relationship. Number three, be honest. A mentor of mine discovered that his son was involved in things that were illegal. He discovered that sitting at the breakfast table, he told me, when two of his friends acknowledged that they knew that and they'd never told him. It's not the loyal friend who isn't honest, even if it's a difficult conversation. The loyal friend is honest, even with the deep challenges. Number four, be available. Make sure that you're not just saying you're a friend, but you're available for your friend in need. Number five, be loyal. Talk to them, not about them. Number six, be vulnerable. Share your own struggles in a friendship. Don't feel like you can handle it on your own. That vulnerability makes it possible for others to be vulnerable. And finally, number seven, be spiritual. Don't just be the kind of friend who is engaged in small talk with people, but be the kind of friend who engages spiritually with a person. Ask the question, what does the Bible say? So we've now talked about two of the three circles of friendship. The circle of commitment, it speaks of the friend who is loyal. The circle of confirmation, it speaks of the friend who is attentive to your insecurities. But we have one left, and true loyal friends will enter into this third circle with you. And that circle is the circle of confrontation. It speaks of the friend who seeks to restore us when we fail. One of the most important things to understand about friendships is that we will not be perfect. We'll struggle, we'll fail, and when we do, we want someone who will be with us in that regard. In the circle of commitment, it was Jonathan who was David's friend. In the circle of confirmation, it was Samuel who was David's friend. But in the circle of confrontation, it will be Nathan who will be David's friend. And this is important as well. By the time David commits the sin with Bathsheba in 2 Samuel chapter 11, he has lost his first two friends. Jonathan has died and Samuel has died. In fact, Jonathan and Samuel aren't responsible for David's sin, nor is David responsible for the fact that they died. But he is responsible for the fact that he did not replace those friendships with another friendship. If you find yourself not necessarily having those kinds of friendships, I want to remind you that they are important to your spiritual integrity. David finds that having lost his first two friends, he needs the third friend, the circle of confrontation. Confrontation speaks of the friend who seeks to restore us when we fail. And Nathan comes to David's side when that happens. In fact, the Lord sends Nathan to King David to confront him about this particular sin. Two things are important in this discussion. One is that Nathan tells a story, you may remember it, about a shepherd who had only one lamb, and the other shepherd who had a large flock came and took the one lamb. And of course, David gets all upset about that, right? But here's what you want to know. Nathan knew King David well enough to know to tell the kind of story that would impact him. And his belief that David will change when confronted is also evident. That's why all of a sudden Nathan says, David, you are the man. He believes that David can change. When it comes to a circle of confrontation, that's the kind of friend you want. One that knows you well and one that believes you can change. The definition of loyalty means to value others through commitment, confirmation, and when necessary, confrontation. Here's what I want you to do in your small groups when you break now. I want you to think about those three words. I want you to think about which one of those you may be strong in and which one of those you may be weak in. There's a good chance that one of you is strong in one area and one is strong in another area. So talk about how you might develop those circles of friendship week. And also talk about how you're encouraged when someone actually does invest in your life, whether it's through commitment, confirmation, or confrontation. And I'll be back in a moment to wrap it up. Welcome back. I trust your small group time was helpful as you discussed what it means to be a loyal friend. I'm here in the meadow with that purple aster flower that actually communicates the idea in florography, or the language of the flowers, of loyalty. This was the flower that was chosen to communicate loyalty. Think about that this week. May you remember to be the kind of friend that is confirming, if necessary is confronting, and that is committed to your friendships. Take a look at the next section, which will be the next 2 words we'll talk about in our next session together. For your next week, I want you to begin reading the section on mercy and humility. Those are the final 2 words of our 5 key words that we need to have to develop good relationships and strengthen our relationships with one another. And next week, I'll meet you in the vegetable garden when we look at the sunflowers.